I'm Stephen Price.
Hello, I'm Cara Githens.
This is The Innkeepers, a podcast by Sanctuary Inn. At Sanctuary Inn, we believe we are called to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers.
On this podcast, we will be interviewing guests who have much to teach us about the many facets of missionary care. Let's learn together and be encouraged to press on in the work God has given each one of us to do.
Hi, this is Steve.
Hello, this is Cara.
And we'd like to welcome you to another episode of the Innkeepers podcast. Cara, take a minute and introduce our guest to our listeners.
Yes, today we are excited to be able to interview Amy Young. She is a licensed professional counselor, and she served in China for nearly 20 years. And while she was there, she held various leadership roles with her organization, and one of them was the member care director for 10 years. After leaving the field, she co-founded Velvet Ashes, which is an online community for women working cross-culturally. Since then, she has founded Global Trellis, which develops the spiritual life of cross-cultural workers. You can find out more about Global Trellis at their website, globaltrellis.com. So Amy is also the author of 5 books for cross-cultural workers. She lives in Colorado right now, and she is delighted to not have to get up in the middle of the night to cheer for the Denver Broncos and Kansas Jayhawks. So we are super excited to get to know Amy a little bit today and hear what she has to share with us.
And we'll try to stay out of the football world, and we'll just keep it to missions today. Anyway, looking forward to our conversation with Amy.
Well, Amy, so glad you're here with us today.
Thank you. It's just a joy to be here. I appreciate it.
Well, Amy, help us and help our listeners get to know you a little bit better. Tell us a little of your story, your background, and some of your cross-cultural experience. And so just give us the little bio there.
Happy to. I would say I grew up in a Christian home, so we won't go all the way back, but that just helps frame it a little bit. And in the mid-90s, I moved to China. So I didn't use the M word for about 20 years.
Right.
That's what we referred to ourselves as cross-cultural workers. So I lived in China. I was with a relational ministry, so taught English for a number of years, and then became on national staff and helped train people all around Asia how to teach English as a second language. And then I moved into, I kind of get a little bit bored. So like every 5 years, it's like shift.
Yeah. Okay.
One seat to the right on the bus, one seat to the right. So then my next shift on the bus was to be head of member care. I was the member care director. Okay. So did that for about 10 years. Was a program director. So we had about 200 people on the field in the program I was in. Shifted back to the United States after about 20 years in China. Loved the 20 years. It was understandably a hard shift, but when the Lord closes a door and opens another, you're like, okay, we'll get off this bus and on another bus. All right. So then on my new bus, I helped start an organization called Velvet Ashes, which is an online community for women serving cross-culturally. I then started writing a number of books. So I've written 5 books for cross-cultural workers. And then about 2 years ago, started an organization called Global Trellis. And Global Trellis is just like a trellis in a garden, exists to support and help the plant grow.
Right.
One of the things I learned with Velvet Ashes is just the way digital resources could be used in the cross-cultural world, and the way digital resources with Velvet Ashes, we were kind of now in this Zoom world, everybody is like digital. Right. But we started about 7.5 years ago. And so we were on the cutting edge of how to use digital technology to encourage, support, involve, connect cross-cultural workers. And it just kind of like our eyes exploded with, oh my word, there are so many ways this can be used. And suddenly, being in one organization in Asia, I mostly only knew other cross-cultural workers, either in my organization or in Asia. And it was so wonderful to now be connected to people in a whole nother region, South America or Africa or Europe. And so as I left Velvet Ashes, I am a teacher at heart, and I'm a lifelong learner. In 8th grade, when I was asked, what's your job going to be? My answer was a college student.
Okay.
And my teacher just laughed and said, well, that's not really a job because it's not financially viable.
Yeah.
But that was my truest heart. I just love learning, and I love helping others learn. And so when I looked out at kind of what is needed in the cross-cultural world, so many people receive either no or really good training at the beginning, and they're kind of sent off. And, if you're only going for 1 or 2 years, that's awesome. But if you end up going 3, 4, 5, 20, 30, 40 years, a lot of organizations have the value of developing people. But this is the problem I even felt myself on the field. When you come together for a large conference with your organization and they really want to do professional training, then the thing is, you just want to be with your friends. Like, you've been away from people, you've been at a distance, and it's like, oh my gosh, we can go get coffee or we can eat noodles.
Yeah.
And so all the training, it's like drinking from a fire hose with people who don't really want to be drinking it. And I realized with technology, we can do a lot of training now. We can do a lot of investing and building and continue to develop people kind of spread out. We all know true transformation doesn't come because you heard something once and you're like, oh, got it. All right. My prayer life is different forever.
Yeah.
We have aha moments, but true transformation comes from being exposed to something over and over. So just like a trellis is built of a lot of different pieces of wood coming together, Global Trellis has a number of different specialists. So we've got a grief specialist. We've got a third culture kid specialist. We've got a transition specialist. We've got a financial specialist, 2 spiritual director specialists, a life hack specialist, a culture specialist, a language acquisition specialist. Because our philosophy is you don't just, again, hear something once and you're like, oh, got it. Yeah. We need to have this information kind of dripped into us over time. And just for that lifelong learning that we are, no matter who we are, no matter how long we've been on the field, we can all grow in an area. We're all still in play, and God isn't done with any of us. So that's, in a nutshell, Amy Young.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and the great thing about the digital too is that when someone feels the need, they like log on and like, oh, here it is. Here's what I need. Rather than, like you said, whenever missionaries get together, they just want to be with one another. Yeah. They just want to go to Burger King, if there is such a thing, or KFC sometimes or something,
They just want the fellowship way more than they want the data dump.
And that's what they need then. And that is spiritual. That is spiritual for their souls. That is good for their hearts and just that have that level of connection. Yep.
But so by you doing this on an online platform now, you have this, like you said, the felt need is there, and then someone will look for it and they'll have it on the field when maybe they have the emotional time and space to really take it in.
And I would say people who access Global Trellis tend to be in 2 camps. It's about 50% are people on the field. So either their organization has told them about Global Trellis or they've discovered it and they're like, oh yeah, that workshop sounds interesting, or I want to read that blog post, or I want to participate in that challenge. Another 50% are organizations. And so really part of Global Trellis's role is we are excellent at creating material. And so we want to create material that organizations can use so their time isn't, it's not that it's not invested, but we all only have so much time. So if we're good at creating materials, let's create them, and then organizations use it so they can do what they want to be doing with their people, investing in their people, spending time with their people instead of spending time creating material.
Right.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, can you share with us a little bit about the aspect of self-care? Because I think today it would be really important for us to guide our conversation in that direction, because I think that's an area that a lot of missionaries on the field probably neglect. And some of what you provide can help with that self-care. But can you speak to that? How would you define self-care?
I love this question, Cara, because I think so many people have a misunderstanding of self-care. And honestly, I think the enemy wants us to be or be confused about what self-care is. If we think self-care is, treat yourself, or I deserve a spa day, that is just such a shallow understanding of what self-care is. I believe the Lord has made us to be both individual and then communal, and that we need to be taking care of both. Mm-hmm. It's very similar. Hello, what do cross-cultural workers know more than anything else? International flights. And we all know the adage, put the oxygen mask on yourself. Why? So that you can selfishly sit there breathing oxygen while everybody else around you is not breathing oxygen and, goes into oxygen deprivation and they pass out. No, you put the oxygen mask on so that you can serve those around you. Right. But if you don't put the oxygen mask on yourself and you're like, I'm just going to hold my breath and I'm just going to help everyone around me. I don't care who you are. God has made your body that at a certain point, even if you were the most amazing swimmer in high school and know how to hold your breath for 4 minutes, we're all going to reach a point where we will pass out if we have not. And I think part of self-care, honestly, it's an issue of right perspective of who God is and who we are. Mm. And when we think, oh, self-care is selfish, what we're saying is, I know better than God does. Mm. I don't need to follow the rules God's put in place for literally every creature on the planet. Every creature, whether you're plant, animal, we have been created that we are not self-sustaining. We all need outside food, water, oxygen. Uh-huh. And the outside need points to the fact that we're all limited. Uh-huh. And so whenever we ignore those limitations, what we're indirectly saying is, I don't need you, God. Mm. When we live within the rhythms, within the boundaries that the Lord has set, it helps us to live in right perspective and right relationship and right position with God, of saying, I do need you, Lord. I do need rest. I do need food. I do need an hour of quiet. I do need fill in the blank. And for some people, it's going to be that I do need a hamburger at Burger King. Yeah. That's what I need now, is that fellowship. My soul is longing for that connection. And sometimes it's, I need to go on a walk in nature. And sometimes it's, I need an hour of silence. And when I think we place self-care of self-indulgence or self-idol, that's not what self-care is. Right. Self-care is tending to ourselves in a way that allows us then to tend to others.
Yeah. Well, and you think about the rhythm of the Old Testament, the Sabbath, and God saying, do you trust me enough to take a day off? Do you trust me enough to stop everything else you're doing for a whole day and just let me take care of you? And in a way, it's that idea of Sabbath that a lot of people have written about, and that we talk about with our missionary guests often. Yeah. I think Cara brings it up to a lot of people and reminds them that, the world will keep turning. Everything does happen. Yeah. Sometimes I repeat to myself, the Messiah has already come.
I know.
It's not me. He's already come. He's done his work. He's left a few things for me to do, but nothing. It's really that am I gonna trust him enough to take care of myself? So.
And I do want to honor the tension that listeners feel of the very real needs. You think someone might be human trafficked today. Mm-hmm. Or someone might die because they don't get medical care. I mean, so we're not just talking about fluffy things. These are serious, important, life-altering things that people on the field encounter. And so I understand that tension is real and it pulls you. And yet even Jesus withdrew. Yeah. Even Jesus spent time with the 12. And I think we can always look to, what does it look like to be human? to
Yeah.
Jesus. Okay, we can take our cues from him.
Right.
That even though he was surrounded by urgent needs that didn't take a break, are you going to heal someone on the Sabbath? Are you going to, he faced some of these complex issues.
Yeah.
And yet he still lived a life of rhythms, of pulling away, of prayer, of sometimes ignoring needs.
Yeah.
Yeah. We have a dear friend who was a medical doctor in Pakistan for about 18 years. And it was her and a couple of other women, because it was, they ran a women's clinic, and they worked a lot of hours. There was literally a knock on the door in the middle of the night, and you've got to attend to it. And so, yeah, there's some real definite needs you just really you can't say no to sometimes.
Yeah.
So.
So what are some things that you would think that you could share that missionaries might need to be doing for their emotional and spiritual health?
One of the greatest things, and it's one of the things we focus on at Global Trellis, is tending your own soul. So often when you're in full-time ministry, when your job is God, and I'm putting that in quotation marks, it can kind of get really blurry. What do I need to do because it is part of my job? And then, but we can't pour out of a well that runs dry.
Yeah.
We can't give out of. And so I think one of the things every one of us needs to really lean into is, how do I maintain my own relationship with God? How do I, kind of apart from whatever my ministry might be, the needs that are around me, the lessons that I'm needing to teach, and maybe I'm discipling certain, a certain stage of the spiritual journey. And so taking that seriously, but also saying, God doesn't just want you to know about him to help others. God loves you and he wants to know about you. And so I think one of the primary things with cross-cultural workers is always to invite them to connect with the beloved, and that the beloved loves them. And so first and foremost, to tend that relationship, and to, if it's feeling a bit dry, then say, all right, again, what would I do in any other relationship? I would sort of do an experiment. All right, do I like going out to a restaurant with you? And you think, oh, this will be great. And then it's so noisy and you find yourself like trying to scream at the other person. What did you do today? And they're like, and you're like, okay, never mind. Let's just eat and talk later, And so you try things and you go, all right, we thought that restaurant was going to work. That was a bustola, but now we know that doesn't work. So I think you try things with God. It's a different style of music, a different form of prayer. And just instead of like, oh, that's not working. All right, well, let's just try something different in this season. I would imagine this is being recorded after about a year of COVID.
Yes.
And so maybe things that worked pre-COVID didn't work as well mid-COVID. And then even now, like a year into it, things that were life-giving 3 months ago now might just feel like, I'm gonna pull my hair out. And so continuing to find ways to connect with God. And I would also say another way to just stay kind of vibrant is find ways to connect with yourself also. I think so often cross-cultural workers are like, I don't have any hobbies. I don't do anything for fun, or I don't know what to do. I'll be honest, interesting people know kind of what to do for fun. Dull, bland, overworked people do not. And so if that is fitting you now, I don't mean to cast judgment on anyone listening to this, but more it's an invitation that find something that you enjoy. And I know so many people now enjoy watching Netflix. Hey, I love me good TV too, so I'm not going to cast any stones there. But I think that's an easy default for a lot of cross-cultural workers to fall into, oh, I'll just watch something online. And I would love to encourage people, find something you can do in your physical world. So if that's cooking, if that's photography, if that's some sort of handcrafts, find something you can do that's not so digital.
And something that's not so sedentary, perhaps. Just
Right.
being active with connecting your whole body.
Yep.
Your emotions are engaged, your body's engaged. All that kind of just can be generally feels more life giving, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, and a lot of times just getting out and exploring your location.
Mhm.
And, whenever you arrive somewhere, there's always kind of the initial, this is where I'm learning where I am, I'm learning my way around. But then the longer you're there, it's more of oh, let's find out more. And you start learning more history. And then you start, oh, did you know this happened here? And like, oh, there's a museum for that, or there's a monument or a statue. And so things like that
Yeah.
you can kind of, that circle gets more and more, you learn more about where you're living or the country you're in, the city you're in, whatever. So anyway, so you've kind of inferred, made reference to it a little bit, but talk a little bit about the hazards of not taking care of yourself.
I think the two greatest hazards, one is burnout.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that can be at epidemic levels in some different fields, some different jobs within cross-cultural work. That's not that surprising, sadly, to us. We know that burnout is. I would say the other risk of not doing self-care is becoming numb. And where things that used to move you, or even things that quote unquote should move you, you're because you haven't been taking care of yourself, you're just sort of numb to it. You see a beggar child and it's just like, oh, another day at the office, there's another beggar child. And the things that would move Christ don't move you. So I think if you begin to notice the things of life, you're not noticing beauty, you're not noticing sadness, you're not noticing a beautiful sunset or something in nature. If you're like, I am not noticing any nuance in my life, that
feels flat.
It all feels flat. And it's just like, yeah, I just have to keep doing this, whatever this is. I have to keep educating these kids. I have to keep whatever it is. That is a real danger of not taking care of yourself.
Yeah. Do you think it's the missionary's sense of just the overwhelming need of what work they're in that probably keeps them from doing what they should do to take care of themselves? Or what other things do you think of that stand in the way of the missionary doing what is best for them?
Oh, Steve, I think there's many answers to that question. One answer, I think, honestly, it kind of goes back to that below the surface belief that someone has. Okay. So if you believe not that God has invited you into something, but that God is depending on you to do something, there's not then that freedom. Like if you feel like this is relying on me. So I think if it's kind of going below the surface to the belief, none of us do something just because. All of us have a story behind us. All of us, whether it was something maybe your mom said once, or you picked up in Sunday school, or was just a value in your family. And I think so many cross-cultural workers are wonderful servants who love the Lord and are willing to work hard.
Yes. Yeah.
And so I do not want to cast shame on anybody. Right. I just think the Lord invites us to so much more freedom than we realize. And we sometimes are the ones that put the shackles on ourselves, thinking that's what God wants. And I think it saddens him how willing we are to forego the freedom that he died for, that he rose again, that he came for us to have.
Yeah.
And again, he is a God of love. So he is not going to rip those shackles off. But even through messages like this podcast, through books, through other podcasts, through sites like Global Trellis, it's an ongoing invitation to remember who you are. You are the son, you are the daughter of the most loving, kind God, who is a God of justice. He is for protecting the orphans and the widows. He is against all of the injustice in the world. But that does not negate that he is also for you, that he is also for your good, that he also loves you and wants your marriage, wants your singleness, wants your parenting to be rich and to be life-giving for you as well.
Uh-huh. I'm often talking with our guests that come through here at Sanctuary Inn and debriefing them and hearing their stories. And one of the things that I feel like God has really laid on my heart to share with our guests is that God is as much interested in what he's doing in your life as he is in what you do. It's not an either or. It's God cares about you and your heart and your ministry.
Yeah, if the listeners could see my face, I'm like smiling and nodding. I'm like, yes. And I almost yelled, preach, Cara. Yes.
So what would you say some of the tools and resources are that are out there right now that help a missionary that maybe realize, okay, I haven't been doing a good job of self-care, and I maybe I have some of these beliefs that I'm the savior of the world here, and I'm not taking care of myself. So what are some resources that are out there available for missionaries right now?
There are a lot, and I think this is an area that's growing. Okay. One that anyone can access, I've mentioned Velvet Ashes before, but they every April have an online retreat. So wherever you are in the world, very affordable retreat. And they have a whole library of past retreats. Oh, nice. So I will also say they are geared for women, but men, if you don't think it's the same scripture. So we're using the same Bible. We're not just using the women's Bible. So men, I would also say, go look at one of the past retreats. Go look at this year's retreat. Get that retreat and build that into your annual rhythm. Mm-hmm. What is so powerful about the Velvet Ashes retreat is it is 100% geared for people on the field. Mm-hmm. And all of the testimonies, all of the examples are people on the field. Uh-huh. There are so many digital resources now, but often they're based out of North America. And so a lot of the examples are, my minivan, and people on the field are like, are you kidding me? Your minivan? Like, how about my running water? You're like, your examples do not really ring true with my life at all.
Yeah.
Velvet Ashes examples will ring true. There are more and more in-person retreats. Pre-COVID, and there will be post-COVID, but organizations like Thrive, they have retreats for women around the world. An organization called Azmira, Azmera. Azmira has retreats around the world for women. There's an organization, and I should have looked it up, but for men. Okay. I can look that up and give that to you and you can put it in the show notes. But there are more and more opportunities for things on the field for people to do them. I would also say Global Trellis with our different, we have a whole variety of resources. Some are workshops. So I'm thinking of 2 workshops in particular for like spiritual development. One of our workshops is on lament. How do you lament? Yeah. And so it's a workshop on what is biblical lament, how do you lament? The presenter, her name is Lane Arnold. And she's really like a lament guide. She walks through several Psalms and helps people understand how to lament. We have another workshop, though, called You Need to Laugh, because I think we need, and it looks at what is the role of biblical laughter in life and how can we foster laughter. We have another workshop on spiritual practices during Advent. So how do you weave some spiritual practices into some of the liturgical year? We also have something called challenges. So out on the website right now, like challenges are a really big thing. 5 days to this or a week of that. And so I'm like, let's devise challenges specifically for cross-cultural workers. Okay. So one of the challenges is based on the scripture in Philippians 4:8. Whatever is right, whatever is lovely, whatever is, think on these things. Uh-huh. And actually it's a 15-day challenge because our thinking, again, doesn't just change. Oh, I'll read this verse once and my thinking. And so every day you get a different word from that verse and to guide you through thinking on those things. So those are just some of the different resources that are available.
Okay.
Thank you. Yes, and we will do our best to link all that in our resources. And I think one of our missions through this podcast is to get people resources.
Mm-hmm.
So.
I would say the same with Global Trellis. There's just a lot. There's a lot out there, and then there's a lot people don't know about. So I love, like, let's just all share with each other what's out there and how we can help each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think a lot of missions have their field conferences and so on, which I think, like you said, it's a chance for other missionaries to gather with one another. And that is often very refreshing, just to spend time with one another.
Absolutely.
And just trusting that God is going to use those times in the lives of the missionaries.
Absolutely. I agree completely.
So to move on to another question, I'm curious, do you have any examples of someone who realized they needed to invest in self-care and they started, tending to their soul, as you've been saying, more, and what was the outcome?
I am aware of some, and in particular, I think at first it feels decadent, or is this something I should be doing with my time? But the more someone does it, the more I have seen them go, oh, I am refreshed. I enjoy what I'm doing. I'm able to see what God is doing a little bit more. And I'm able to even then, I have more margin to be able to partner with him, to be able to kind of pivot and vector and move with where God is moving, instead of having my nose down on the grind and just keep doing. There's more freedom. I think they experience more joy and more freedom, and they feel less like a pawn in a game that God is playing, and more like a participant. And I just think, what a shift from feeling like a pawn to feeling used by God, to feeling like I am participating with God. And again, I just come back to, Paul uses the word freedom so much in his letters, because I think for some reason in our brokenness, our default is not freedom. Our default is slavery in our thoughts, in our relationships. And again, the Lord is like, I want freedom for you. I want freedom for all, but not just for them. I want freedom for you too.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to ask you, have you done a challenge to have someone take a look at freedom versus slavery? I think that could be a fun challenge on your...
That is an excellent... No, I have not, but I'm writing a book sort of related to it. So okay. I've been thinking about freedom a lot.
Yeah. Anyway, that could be a fun challenge, just to have someone do some searching in the scriptures and just trusting that God's going to speak to them through that.
I love that. I'm taking a note of that freedom challenge.
Well, I have another one for you, but we'll get to it later. So.
Oh, good. I'm always like looking for new ideas.
Yeah. So we are believing and trusting that God is using this podcast in the lives of missionaries, and our target is not just the missionary, but the friend of the missionary and the home church of the missionary and the people that are standing, praying for them and supporting them. So talk to those people, and how do you encourage them to encourage their missionary?
I think part of it is now on the web, on the World Wide Web, on the interwebs, as the kids say, on the interwebs, there are so many opportunities to kind of understand what their life is like that other generations didn't have. Other generations had to wait for letters or those sort of, or their person to come back and make a presentation at church. Yeah. And now with places like Global Trellis, another website called alifeoverseas.com.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm. Velvet Ashes. There's, I would encourage friends and missions committees, family members to subscribe to some of these blogs. It's a wonderful front row seat to hear from people on the field, to hear about joys and struggles, to get different examples. And it builds empathy. When we hear each other's stories, when we hear each other's realities, it builds empathy, and it just makes you think about things you might not have thought of before. Oh, I didn't realize how much I take hot water for granted. Or, my life would look different if I only had hot water 1 hour a day. I could work with that, but my life would look different. And it just kind of builds empathy of, so I would really encourage people. There are a lot of great books out there. But just, you don't have to do all the things, but look at those different websites, look at a few different resources and see what fits with your personality. Listen to this podcast, find another, if you listen to this one and you're like, that's not quite my jam, that's okay. There are other podcasts, but find one or two places and just slowly become educated.
Yeah. Okay. So just taking advantage of what's out there to just learn more about the maybe even the geography, where the person's living socially, politically, what's happening. And I think a lot of it times too is just what news are you listening, try to broaden your news source sometimes too. Mm-hmm. I think sometimes our news source is like, oh, this is my city and this is my local news. Whereas if you click over to BBC and you go, oh, man, look at all those countries in the world.
Yeah. Well, and there are so many organizations that will put together news for their part of the world. Like I know, because I lived in China, I'm aware of one called ZG Briefs. Okay. ZG for Zhongguo Briefs. Yeah. And so it's by an organization called China Source. So every Thursday, they send out an email where someone has gone through and found all of these different articles about related to things, life in Asia. Well, other organizations. So I would ask your missionary, where are you getting sources of information? Okay. And if there is some sort of weekly digest summary for their part of the world, mm-hmm. subscribe to that. And you can even just by reading the headlines of kind of what's going on. Right. But I agree, kind of broaden outside of just your local area, whatever your state is doing right now with whatever that's pushing your buttons, broaden to learn a little bit more in another part of the world.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And then that empathy building, and it makes the communication with your missionary mm-hmm. so much easier, more real and personal. And then you can have that friendship and I think in that friendship, you could be a part of the self-care for that missionary. Because you're being a support person to them.
Another thing I love, it's a drum I love to beat in a nice way, is for any friend, family, church member who's listening to this that gets a newsletter, especially if it's digital, hit reply and just write one line. Yeah. Just write. I think sometimes I will feel the pressure myself. I get this long-ish newsletter and I feel, well, if I just say one line, is that not like equal reciprocity back? Right. But the truth is, they would love if you just hit reply and, oh my gosh, that's so funny, what your daughter did, or I'll be praying for the water, or just something that shows I read this. Yeah. And exactly what you're saying, Cara, it fosters that relationship. Mm-hmm. I can't tell you, because I've been on full-time support since the mid-90s. So, oh my word, are we approaching like more than 25 years of newsletter writing? Yeah. And mine are now digital. Not that many hit reply, but I'll tell you, as someone who writes newsletters, I remember who hits reply and I remember who reads them. Uh-huh. So I think sometimes we make the bar so high. I have to know everything about everything to have anything to say. Uh-huh. Just hit reply and say, thanks so much for this newsletter. I appreciate it. Like, again, it doesn't have to be that hard or that long. Just acknowledge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. That's great. That's a great suggestion.
So if you could, we've covered various things here, but if you could choose just one thing that a missionary could do for themselves, a cross-cultural worker could do to improve self-care, soul care in their life, what would it be?
Well, I'm going to say follow Global Trellis. I'm sorry, I don't mean to be self-promoting, except I do believe in what Global Trellis is doing so much. Mm-hmm. We have a different workshop every month. We have these different challenges. And so I think to almost every other field in the world, nursing, education, finances, has some form of professional development or continuing education unit. Uh-huh. I wouldn't want to go to a dentist who went to dentistry school in the 70s and has done nothing to update themselves.
Yeah.
And I just know for myself, like when I read a book or I take a workshop, it gets me excited about what I'm doing in my life too. And so I would say be willing to invest a little bit of your time and a little bit of your money to continue to grow. And that you will reap more than you have invested. But by that continuing to invest, it will then give you ideas and excitement and build in you and encourage you in ways that will help you to care for yourself. It will challenge you in ways, again, those good challenges when someone's like, you need to do more of that or you need to do less of that. Or have you thought about trying this? And you're like, I never did, but I could do that. Okay. No.
To get fresh perspectives, because some people are stuck in a rut.
Yeah.
Yeah. And like you said, there's often, we need that change. We need a change of focus sometimes. And it's whenever you can be around other people or read new material or experience a new thing, then often it's like, oh my goodness, I didn't realize how stuck I was.
Yeah. Or I didn't even realize I needed to know that. And then you mention it, like, well, yeah, now that you mention it, I'm very willing to know more about it or to learn more about that. I just didn't even know that I could learn about it or, yeah.
That's great. Thanks so much. And we are happy to promote Global Trellis, and we're excited about what you're doing and what you're providing for people out there. It's great materials. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm delighted with what you're doing as well, and pray the Lord's blessing on you.
Okay. Well, we look forward. We always extend an invitation to Sanctuary Inn. So if you're in the Northwest, consider yourself invited. We do have a trademark chocolate chip cookie that we don't give the recipe out for, but maybe that might be enough to get someone here as a chocolate chip cookie. So.
It is. I will be at your door next Thursday. So.
Okay. All right. Okay. We'll look for you then.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Amy. Well, Cara, that was a great conversation with Amy. She had a ton of information to share.
Yes, she did. And I really think she was highlighting how important it is to just kind of give ourselves permission to take care of ourselves emotionally and spiritually, and that has really significant consequences, either for the positive or for the negative.
Yeah. I really appreciate it early on when she talked about self-care and how self-care is not just, not necessarily, it's not just a spa day. It's not just, hey, I'm just going to treat myself. And she really challenged my thinking anyway in saying, that's just really just a shallow definition. But it's really, she used the illustration of putting the oxygen mask on yourself, taking care of yourself so that you have the resources to take care of the people around you, whether that's your spouse, your children, the people that you're on a ministry team with, the people to whom you're ministering, every one of those circles, it's going to take you taking care of yourself so you're not just totally worn out.
Yeah. It's almost like a misnomer that we've often equated self-care with a person who's selfish.
Right.
Because the word self is in there. They must be, somehow you are selfish if you take care of yourself. I think that's the general culture that we're sometimes going against. But it's not that. It's if you take care of yourself and your emotional, spiritual well-being and physical well-being, you are going to be more equipped to care for others.
Yeah. So it was a great conversation. She had a lot of good resources, and so those are linked in the show notes. So take a minute and look at those if there's something in particular that caught your attention. And I do appreciate her comments, too, about when we asked her about how missionaries and missionary pastors and missionary care people can help take care of their missionaries. And she's just like, kind of take a minute to try to get into their life and understand where they're living. So that was a great practical help, too.
Well, we hope you enjoyed today's show, and we look forward to next time.
Thank you, and bye-bye. Thank you for tuning in to the Innkeepers podcast. Our mission at Sanctuary Inn is to equip, refresh, and restore God's global workers for kingdom purposes. We hope today's podcast was an encouragement to you, and maybe you were prompted to pass this along to someone you know that will benefit from today's conversation. Creating a podcast is a team effort. Cara and I prepare and do the interviews, and we're grateful for the time that our guests give us out of their busy schedules to help us learn more about missionary care.
We also want to thank Tim Downing for the music that he wrote and performed specifically for the Innkeepers podcast. Tim is a very talented musician, and you can learn more about him and his work at downingkeys.com. Our podcast is edited by Javier Bolanos and is produced by Tim Cowley of Cowley Visuals. If you have media needs, including film, photography, or audio, you can reach Tim at cowleyvisuals.com.
Our website and show notes are prepared by Micah Gibbons, Cara's amazing husband. You can visit the Sanctuary Inn website and learn more about the ministry of Sanctuary Inn at sanctuaryinn.org. Thank you again for joining us on our journey to learn more about missionary care.
See you next time.